This is Michael, ASMR. Today we're going to be doing some Lord of the Rings content, as you've probably guessed from my future title that I have yet to write, but you are now looking at. How does that work? Anyway, so, full disclosure, I am a Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings kind of guy, right? Not too much into the 2020s Lord of the Rings stuff, hopefully for obvious reasons. If you enjoy that stuff, that's good for you. Okay, I just tend to prefer quality depictions of Lord of the Rings. So I just thought I'd do some air tracing Lord of the Rings characters. You know, what else have you got to do with Lord of the Rings? You could either read out aspects of Lord of the Rings. That would be a long ASMR video. Or you could do some kind of role play as a hobbit or something. Or you could just air trace some characters that I'm going to think of from the top of my head, or on the top of my head, or off the top of my head. All of them at the same time. In my head, and I will see if I can spell some correctly. I'm not bad at spelling, but when it comes to likes of characters, of things, they have unusual spellings, don't they? And when you are a fan of films, you won't see them written down as much. Nevertheless, I think I should be okay, but if I do get some spellings wrong, then that's an extra challenge for you to guess what the fuck I'm trying to spell, isn't it? I will probably, because there are so many characters in the Lord of the Rings universe, this will probably stretch onto another video, or more, just on this, I think I said just a film franchise. No, come on. This book, these books by the great J.R.R. Tolkien, 1892 to 1973. J.R.R. Tolkien, his life and death. Off the top of my head, by the way. Okay, so as usual, my fucking introduction is longer than my fucking video entirely, basically. But yeah, I'm sort of amusing myself as we go. That's how this works, I think. You know, so that you don't go mad. You want to try to amuse yourself in life. That's the great challenge. What is the meaning of life? To try to somehow amuse yourself, and then everything else that happens around in life is a bonus, or it could be a detriment. But as long as you can amuse yourself, you're okay. Lord of the Rings air tracing. Let's go now. Where shall we start? There's only one place to start, I guess. Just check out you can see me. Yes, you can. That's right, we're starting off strong with Saron. Did you notice in the films? Some characters would say Saron, some would say Sauron. I don't know the correct way to pronounce that. I haven't read all of the books, to be fair. Huge books. Fun little add-on. When I was at school, a little while ago, there was we had a section at primary school where we would just read to ourselves. This was an actual sort of class. We would just pull out a book and read. Most of the kids read Harry Potter. Guess what I read? Yeah. Well, like I said, I haven't read all of it, but I read some parts of Lord of the Rings. I would be surprised if there's any book in history with as much description as the Lord of the Rings books. Tolkien loved his description, and it was beautiful. So anyway, yeah. Starting off with Sauron or Sauron, perhaps he explains in the book, somewhere around the book, appendix maybe, of how to describe or how to pronounce each name, because Tolkien was also seemingly a genius in that he developed languages for Lord of the Rings. Elfish, Mordor, bound to be others, as well as the whole map of Middle-earth. He developed all of these things. You know, like we see the great things in Game of Thrones, which I might do at some point as well. I love Game of Thrones. But before you had this whole Middle-earth by Tolkien, languages, extremely impressive, faithfully, appropriately depicted, I would say, by Peter Jackson with the trilogy in the 2000s. Anyway, so yeah, we're over 5 minutes, and I've got one bit of air tracing done. You're happy that you've clicked on this, are you? Well, if you are a Lord of the Rings person, you won't mind just talking or listening to anything to do with Lord of the Rings. One of the greatest, if not the greatest franchise in film and literary history, I would say, in terms of universal appeal, character development, high-class writing, high-class filmmaking, again, themes, truthful themes, humor, whatever you like. Lord of the Rings, books, 2000s films, absolutely have it in spades, as they say. So we have Saron. We started with Saron. Why did we start with Saron? I have no idea. Why not? I guess because of recent depictions, we need to sort of take Saron back for the eye that Saron was. Right? We saw in the flashbacks, or the recounting, retelling of Middle-earth history, the physical form of Saron, but it was still this pretty black character, right? And that's what you get from Lord of the Rings. Good and evil. But even then, the underrated elements of Lord of the Rings, what do you see? You have the likes of the Ring and its influence, including on pretty angelic creatures, not just men or women, but entities. They can be affected and corrupted by it, right? So you had plenty of grey area stuff in Lord of the Rings. But it would also not be hesitant or reticent to feature how entities could become properly detrimental or also properly beneficial. But each time they also had the chance of maybe changing, maybe moving all the way to the other side. A bit like the Force in Star Wars, or the good side or the dark side of things. So they did not shy away from featuring the extremes, but you can notice that there are significant grey area elements in Lord of the Rings as well. So you're never quite sure who's going to be doing what. And speaking of people who you're not quite sure about, great Boromir. Now I'm assuming that you know what happens in Lord of the Rings. Spoiler if you don't know what happens, by the way. I will be talking about spoiler-worthy stuff. Boromir dies. There you go, there's a spoiler. But boy, you were not quite sure what to make of his character. When you first come across him, you don't really like Boromir. You're not too like Boromir. Again, going by the Peter Jackson films. But then you grow to really feel sad when he does get killed by, I think, the 3 arrows. In everything I'm saying, by the way, I'm trying not to say other character names. Because I'm going to be tracing the character names. So I don't want to give them away. But Boromir fights some entities and dies valiantly while saving some other entities. So he regained his valor after he tried to take the ring from another entity. Maybe the best grey area character in Lord of the Rings, because you were really not quite sure what to make of him. But you then really found out that you did value what he did and his contributions when he was killed. That's when you realized, that's when you noticed what you valued in that character. For the aspects, the arrogance, and he was stubborn and delusional and corrupt. He had honor and he had some humor. He had some true good aspects of belief and strength, and ultimately courage in the end. And those elements, at least for Boromir, won out. Cost him his life, but he played his part in some greater good. And so that was a great character, I thought. Boromir, one of the great characters. Alright, now we have another one. A longer one. I think that's how you spell Gamji. I think it's sort of a pretty straightforward phonetic spelling. Samwise Gamji, one of the heroes of the whole thing. But in sort of a reverse Boromir style, in that he was pretty... You didn't really think very much of him at the start. You know, he's just another character's gardener and friend. You don't think too much of him. Physically doesn't seem all that impressive, right? Little pudgy, right? And yet, boy, did he come through to be maybe even the hero of the whole thing, as well as one or two other characters. All the way to the end, to the crack of doom, right there, into Mordor. Probably shouldn't have said that. I could have traced Mordor. Oh well. Yeah, this a great character. Sean Astin, a little strange these days, but depicted really well. He had the voice, the accent. From an American to do that accent, by the way, was spot on. That was a great accent. Was it sort of West Country, I think, something like that. English accent. And all the accents by all the cast members were great as well. Hard to find too many faults in them. Really well done. So yeah, Samwise Gamgee, what can you say? Not too much at the start, then grew to be a great hero of it all, as sort of a great lesson to anyone of maybe you're thinking like you can't make that much of a difference. Well, Samwise Gamgee maybe just more than anyone single-handedly contributed to keeping alive their civilization, their Middle-earth. And they had to combat the likes of the Urai. Some great villains in Lord of the Rings. One of them being the Urai. I did a hyphen. Have you ever seen air tracing with a little... That's a hyphen, isn't it? Dash, hyphen, whatever. The Urai. Yeah, not as much to talk about, but great villains, like another of the villains. Well, I'll just quickly trace them. Orcs, the orcs, probably even better known than the Urukais. If you think of villains in Lord of the Rings, you'll tend to think of the orcs, right? Smaller versions of Urukai, if you like, but Urukai were the fighting Urukai were the better fighters, greater fighters. Some great scenes, I think, especially in the Two Towers with the Urukai. But I think they were the ones who also killed Boromir. Again, what he's supposed to say? Not particularly grey, pretty black characters, but they were designed that way. They were made that way, and that's the curious thing that you'll also find in Lord of the Rings. Even the black characters were made by other characters, maybe some slightly more grey area-ish characters made those black characters. So that's a great device that you can have, in that rather than just having black and white or good and bad, you can have some grey area-ish characters. Cultivate black characters, so you are providing an explanation of where that comes from. You know, in our era of we want to find a backstory to everything. Well, in this instance, you've got the likes of a couple of other characters, including Saron, who create these creatures to resemble a darkness that they want. And so that in itself is a good enough explanation of where these creatures and their darkness comes from. Including even the Ring, maybe the blackest of all the characters. The One Ring wanted to get back to its master, Sauron. Actively, clearly created by Sauron. This character, this inanimate object, seemingly, had some kind of a psychic, deeper dimensional power of influencing people, which we sort of take to be a significant metaphor, but in that universe seemed to carry some kind of an extra power over them, whilst never being properly explained as to how the physics of that work. That's absolutely fine, it's a fantasy. It worked psychologically. This One Ring was created to be in such a way as to want to get back to Sauron. So Sauron was the explanation behind the ring, as this purely dark, black character, if you like, where it would corrupt the hearts, the minds, the physicality of anyone who kept the ring for a long time, including Bilbo Baggins, hero of the Hobbit films. His life was elongated. He lived for a long time, basically meaning you can sell your soul to the devil, or to the One Ring. You can succeed to an extent, in a fashion. You can succeed, but what is really existing? Just because you live, or just because you get some material gains, what are you actually doing? What have you actually sacrificed? And Bilbo, whilst one of the hobbits, one of the more incorruptible creatures of Middle-earth, still were not entirely incorruptible, and it did affect him, and his mind, his approach, ultimately were affected. Thankfully, he didn't really go anywhere with the ring, and so it probably had less of an effect than on another major character. The more you do with that which you sell your soul for, the more it can really damage you. Thankfully, Bilbo didn't really do very much with the ring, but it still affected him, and we saw when his face changed, when he was dealing with another character, that there was a level of, if you like, darkness or evil that developed on through Bilbo. And so you have to be very careful what you give up, even if you get that which is most precious to you, longer life. You sell your soul to the devil, you might survive, but you might now survive in hell with the devil. So you got to be careful. And again, some fantastic themes all through the Lord of the Rings. As I've realised now, this video has mostly turned into a Lord of the Rings conversation, monologue session. Hopefully you like Lord of the Rings the way I do, and this is still okay to view and listen to. Anyway, there you go. Who else do we have? Okay, alright. Saruman, another great character, Christopher Lee, fantastic portrayal by Christopher Lee, just perfect as this dark wizard. And again, talk about being corrupt. The wizards, probably the most intelligent beings, or certainly up there, in all of Middle-earth. And Saruman might have, if he had an IQ test, he probably would have come out top. But the great thing of great device of this was to show that it's not just intelligence. You need more than just the intelligence, because Saruman actually thought himself into trouble. He thought that the only way to survive, again, giving up your principles, giving up your morality, if you like, your ethics, for a longer life, sustain yourself, was to give in to Sauron. And so Saruman thought that there was no way out. He was already despairing. He thought there was no way for the creatures to survive. Like he said to another wizard, that it would be wise to join. We must join with Sauron. we're doomed otherwise. We have to give in. So he lost. I think it was shown in The Hobbit that he was not always this kind of character, but over time, and with his flawed analysis, he'd given up. He joined the dictator. He joined the side hell-bent on destruction, and not just, oh, I have to join, but Saruman joined in the end pretty gladly when he built up his own armies of Urai and other creatures. He was quite bold and happy and to war and all of that type of thing, and rip them all down with some of the creatures. And so he actually turned into that Sauron-like creature, to the point where I'm sure if he'd had the chance, he would have looked to take over from Sauron. Maybe launch an assault on Mordor herself. Again, if there are any of these speculations in the books, again, which I have not read, I just read parts of it when in my youth, then that's fine, that might explain it there, but with my analysis mostly being focused on Peter Jackson's trilogy, we didn't get that level of potentiality from the character of Saruman. But what he did do was impressive enough, was consequential enough. Anyway, I think we've probably gone on for a decent time here, over 20 minutes this time. We've still got plenty of characters to go for Lord of the Rings air tracing. But just before we go, let's leave with the main. If you had to think of maybe a main character that you first would think of, you would think of Frodo Baggins, of course. How could we leave out Frodo Baggins? Now, overall, as time passed, more of the focus shifted on to the merits of Samwise Gamji. Justifiably, understandably so. But you can't discount how long Frodo bore the ring. He was the ring bearer. And so he had to, and not just in the Bilbo staying in the Shire type of way, but he had to take it all around with all the temptations and corruptions increasing. He had to put the ring on in deadly situations. He was more affected, obviously, than anything else, and at the end, when he was saved by Sam, he wasn't saved for Middle-earth. He had to leave, he had to go. He had been properly damaged. So you didn't just get this nice little fairy tale ending from Tolkien. He was saying, okay, sometimes you go to war, you might have things like PTSD. Your life might now be forever changed. You're going to be badly affected. Not to say now that the world itself hasn't been saved. The world was saved, but like Frodo said, but not for him. It had been saved for other people, for other creatures. Which is why we then saw at the end Sam with his kids. That's who it had been saved for, the future generations. Frodo now had to leave and go to the west on the nice little white boat. A great character, Elijah Wood, fantastic, what can you say? A great character, led from the front, one of the smallest characters, and yet with one of the biggest hearts, and some of the best elements of courage was shown from Frodo, for all the things analysis that has been built up over time to do with Frodo. I think when all is said and done, you would see that this was a great hobbit, a great character. A character where you could probably delve into even more, rather than, again, just being on the side of either he's just a perfect hero or he was ultimately weak in big moments. All kinds of creatures, all kinds of people, you and me, could be weak in big moments, especially when we had been weakened through months or years of other weakening of ourselves. So we mustn't judge Frodo too harshly if he failed towards the end with his journey. He had passed enough tests for, I think, analysts to respect been all about, and his function from Tolkien. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed some Lord of the Rings rambling to help you relax before sleep. Bit of air tracing, quite a few more characters to go if we feel like revisiting this in the future. I do like films and TV shows and some books and things here and there. So, until next time, sleep well.